Sisters who watch. Sisters who watch. Sisters who watch.
Quiet
on set. Hey y'all, hey. Hello everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to Sisters Who Watch.
I'm Shelby.
And I'm Laura, and we're sisters who watch everything. TV, movies, sports, concerts, and even traumatizing docuseries. We love to watch, and we love talking about it even more. Today we're watching
Quiet on Set. The Dark Side of Kids TV docuseries. This is a tough one, people.
Yeah. Get ready. Buckle in. Before we jump into our review, make sure that you are subscribed to Sisters Who Watch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, so you get updates when we post new episodes, and follow us on all of our social medias at Sisters Who Watch, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're there, so go check us out and support us. Okay, and just a disclaimer, if anyone has heard of Quiet on Set, you know it is about sexual harassment, child abuse, sexual abuse, so we will be talking about those very sensitive subjects.
So here's the logline for Quiet on Set. A docuseries that uncovers the toxic culture behind some of the most iconic children's shows of the late 1990s and early 2000s. It follows like Nickelodeon during its peak, the late 90s, early 2000s, our childhood. And also has like a specific eye on like Dan Scheider and his shows. It is a 5-part limited documentary series that aired on Investigation Discovery, which I did not know was a cable channel, and is currently streaming on Max, which is where we watched it.
Yes.
So all 5 episodes are on there, so you can start watching now. The series actually was just 4 episodes initially, but they did so well, like broke records on Investigation Discovery, and Max kind of broke the internet. And because of that, they released a 5th bonus episode on April 7th called Breaking the Silence, where they did a check-in with interviewees for the documentary series, talked about social media response, current events, and just the overall response to the show. So I appreciated having that update and check-in.
Going into this docuseries, there were rumors about Dan Scheider and him being creepy and all of that for years, when he was fired from Nickelodeon 2018. I remember first hearing stuff about that back then, specifically like the foot fetish. I feel like that's the thing that a lot of people had been talking about for the past few years.
Yeah.
They're like, why were there so many feet on iCarly and Victorious and all these shows? So I remember that really distinctly. People were like, oh yeah, like Dan Scheider has a foot fetish. Like that was something I knew coming in. And that was really like the only narrative I had heard about Dan Scheider and Nick. Like what did you know about this controversy?
I didn't know much, to be honest. Like I didn't realize there was this whole foot fetish thing.
Yeah.
The first time I really knew there was like drama or issues with Dan Scheider was after I read Jennette McCurdy's memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died. She doesn't mention him by name. She talks of him as like the creator, but everyone kind of knew who she was talking about. And It really wasn't until that when I was like, Dan Scheider, like what's going on? And then I remember looking him up and like reading articles and seeing things like, oh, this guy is like a creepy dude, which is crazy because he really ran Nickelodeon from like the late 90s to the mid 2000s. And I remember growing up, it would say like created by Dan Scheider. Like every
show.
Nick show was created by him.
Like you, I listened to Jennette McCurdy's book on audiobook, I'm Glad My Mom Died. And yeah, she talks about a toxic, abusive creator on iCarly. And I immediately was like, oh, that's Dan Scheider. Because, you hear these things about him, how he was creepy and like very demanding. So I already kind of knew he wasn't a great guy. So I knew who she was talking about. And and that came out 2 years ago now. Every single show that was talked about on Quiet on Set, we loved as kids. All that. Crazy. We watched that. Amanda
thought it
show.
was so
I remember when they
funny.
played the theme song, I was like, Amanda. Right? I was like,
Show.
that's in my brain forever. I was like, we loved these
Drake and Josh
shows.
too. Zoey 101.
Drake
They
and
all had
Josh,
iconic
Zoey
theme songs.
101. Yeah, iCarly, Victorious. We loved every single one of those shows. Every single one. So it's just like, yeah, it was really, really hard to watch.
I feel like there was a time when I loved Nick more than Disney and felt like funnier and maybe edgier. And now as we reflect, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it was edgier because some of the jokes were like meant for
Yeah.
adults. But it felt like Nick was like where older kids would watch and Disney was for kiddie kids. So it starts off with like background on Dan Schneider. He is like the main character at the beginning, and we learn about how he was an aspiring actor and wasn't really panning out, so started to pivot into like writing and was given an opportunity to create a show for Nickelodeon, which was All That, first of its kind, like sketch comedy show for kids. Really groundbreaking and was the start of Dan becoming like the king of Nickelodeon. The real issues seem to start on the Amanda show set, which is Dan's like second big show. And because Amanda Bynes was such a star, like one of his most successful shows.
Yeah, so Dan sees Amanda on All That and was like, this girl needs her own show. So Amanda and Dan are really close. He creates a show for her. And we also learn about how Dan Scheider created this toxic environment specifically for women and how sexual harassment was just pervasive on these sets. Jenny and Christy were the two women in the Amanda show writers' room. And the two of them, they split a salary while they were working on the Amanda show, and no other men in the writers' room had to split a salary. Dan would show porn in the office, and he'd be like, Jenny, Christy, look, isn't this funny? Look at this.
A few things that stuck out to me with the Jen and Christy stories are one, it is so hard for women in entertainment. They were both so thrilled to be TV writers. That is really hard to be in a writer's room, especially as a woman. And the fact that they were willing to take half the pay and deal with a toxic work environment just to try and make it entertainment is awful.
And it was interesting also hearing like Dan Schneider had all these woman-led shows, right? Like Zoey 101, The Amanda Show, iCarly, Victorious, like woman-led, woman-centered. But the fact that he created such a toxic workplace for women on set, it was just so alarming. And some of the people spoke to like, oh, you know, Dan had these like gorgeous, cute, like very feminine, girly girls lead all the shows. And they kind of said that maybe he did that because he was living out like a fantasy, you know, because he never got the girl when he was a kid, when he was a teen. So it's just really strange seeing that dynamic behind the scenes when he's like, you know, has Amanda at the front and he loves her and she's a star. And yeah, it just is very contradictory.
Dan told one of the writers, oh, women aren't funny. You know, women,
I can't.
you know, aren't funny. That's why they're not in the writer's room. That's why they're not like comedians. And I don't really get that. If you thought Amanda Bynes was so funny at a comedy club in LA that you had her come to All That, and then you created a show for her, and you're saying women aren't funny? It just really blew my mind. And I think it showed like his creepy psyche and his crazy psyche, that clearly something was wrong. Because like you were saying, you're creating a lot of female-led shows, but you have all male writers' rooms and you don't think women are funny. Make it make sense.
So to wrap up Jenny and Christy, Jenny sued Nickelodeon and the company settled. And she was like, okay, well, at least, you know, hopefully this doesn't happen, you know, to other women. However, the harassment didn't stop. And we see that this is a really, really sad pattern at Nickelodeon because people are speaking up. I think that's what's really disturbing. Like, people are coming forward and saying, oh, I was harassed, I was abused. But
Yeah.
it didn't change. It took over 20 years for anything to happen. Oh my goodness. Okay, so it only gets worse from here,
Yeah.
folks.
Buckle
So
up, people. Get
hold
ready.
on tight. So we hear about this story regarding this young actress named Brandy, and she was just a guest star on the Amanda Show, just like basically an extra, like didn't have many lines. And we hear from Brandy's mom, and how Brandy became close to one of the personal assistants on set, Jason Handy. And they would communicate and they would exchange emails. And Brandy's mom didn't see much harm in it. But then one day, Brandy like shut the computer and like ran away fast from the computer. And her mom was like, "Brandy, what's wrong?" And the mom sees that Jason Handy, the PA who was on set of the Amanda Show, sent her a naked picture of him. And Brandy was, a minor, right? Like she was a kid.
Yeah, she might
So
have been like 9. Like she was
like
young.
10.
Yeah.
Yes, she was really, really young.
Ugh. Eventually, I think the cops get a tip about Jason Handy and they go into his apartment and find 10,000 images of like child porn and little
Oh my
mementos
gosh.
from girls and letters. It was just
Ugh.
really bad. And the fact that he was like a production assistant on a kids' TV show, and per what the child actor said, like he would take them from their parents to set. Like he was around the kids constantly, even joining
Oh
like a
my
Bible study
gosh.
on set. Like really bad that you have someone doing those things who clearly has issues.
Ugh.
What was the background check? Are we doing mental health profiles for these people?
Clearly not. That's a decent segue to talk about Drake Bell, who played a huge role in this docu-series. I know that you also remember him from the Amanda Show. Like he was such a huge character. And remember he and Amanda would do that bit when they're like really country and they have the accents. And I loved that. I remember as a kid loving that so much. And they showed a clip of Totally Kyle,
I
him,
remember
him
that.
as the surfer. I was like, oh my gosh, like he was so funny on the Amanda Show. I guess I didn't realize that he was acting since he was 5 and he was on all
Andre
of these,
Maguire, like
yeah, these
huge,
big movies and big
big
shows like
child star.
Seinfeld. Drake Bell opens up about the abuse he suffered from Brian Peck, who was a dialogue coach, and everyone loved him. Like all that cast was like, yeah, he was the best, like super charming. We're all really comfortable around him.
I think it shows that predators, right, serial killers, can
Mm,
be really good at what they do, right? They
yeah,
can be very strategic, they can be fake, they can be the nicest people, and then be doing crazy thing behind closed doors. It's what
yeah,
everyone said about Jason Handy. They were like, "Oh, he was just seemed like the nicest small town boy from like Oklahoma." Like it's looks can be
insane.
deceiving.
He had a huge presence on the Amanda Show, all that. He was the pickle boy. I don't remember the pickle boy, um, but such a weird concept. I hated the shot when he put like a pickle through the doorknob. Do you remember seeing that?
So that's why when Dan Schneider says, "Oh, nothing was sexual," I'm like, "Okay,
I'm
you
like,
put a pickle through a hole. Come on."
that's so clearly like a glory hole reference, which is like so sexual and it's just like really
It's like we're
disturbing. Like,
not stupid. We can all see what you were doing. So stop feigning ignorance.
and I really liked how Drake's dad knew from day
Real
one.
MVP.
That was shocking. He was like, I knew something was up with him. I was like, get him away from Drake. I don't want him around my son. And when they showed the clip of Leonardo DiCaprio, and Brian Peck, and Brian Peck was like rubbing all over like Leo's body and was like, "Oh, it's the hottest, hunkiest teen star." It's like, why are we talking about like 14-year-olds in that way? And also, when one of the all that cast members, when they all went to his house, remember this story? And he was like, "What's this weird picture of a clown?" And he was like, "Oh, let me show you." And he shows everyone at the party pen pal letters from John Wayne Casey. That really
should
freaked me
have
out.
been the biggest red flag ever. Pen pal letters from a serial killer.
What? That's insane.
Sometimes I'm like, what were these parents doing? I don't want to judge, but if you find out someone that's working with your kids is pen pals with the serial killer, wouldn't you
Get out of there.
run? Yeah, I would get out of that house as fast as I can. Probably throw up everything I ate, not trusting this guy. What meat did I just eat? Sorry.
Oh,
Two, I would have called the cops. Are you crazy?
Immediately.
I would have reported him to HR. Something. That does not seem right. These people were too comfortable, too trusting.
Oh my gosh. Or just too terrified. I think that was also, they were just so scared of Dan. And that just shows that what a toxic environment they created. It's so sad. Okay, so John Wayne Casey's best friend, Brian Peck, so disturbing. So he was preying on Drake Bell from day one. Remember with Brian Hurd's mom, production was like, "Oh, she doesn't like the situation, so we're gonna find a way to get rid of her." It felt like the same way. Brian Peck was like, "Oh, Drake's dad is getting in the way of me and Drake. I need to get rid of him." And that's exactly what he did.
And he knew that Drake's parents were divorced and had issues and was able to prey on that. And that's what these people do. They find the little holes and they're like, okay, this is where I can slide in and fit. Brian Peck found a way to isolate the dad from Drake, where the mom became Drake's manager. And sadly, the mom was not able to be as focused or plugged in as Drake's dad. And Brian Peck swooped in. And sadly, that's when sexual harassment and abuse began to happen. He would spend so much time with Drake, drive him places for hours, have him stay over at his house because he's like, "Oh, you live in Orange County, just stay with me, it's easier." Like, he would find ways to make Drake think, "Oh yeah, I'm just trying to help you." And he basically replaced Drake's dad and doing all of, the manager duties. And it was really tough hearing Drake talk about what happened. He didn't go into details, but he was like, think of the worst things that could happen to someone. That's what Brian Peck did to me.
Ooh. Chills.
And I was like, ooh.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And that's all we needed to hear. Like, that was a mic drop moment. After that,
I know.
Got it, understood, don't need you to say anymore. It's great in the first place that Drake did come forward and share, because he said he hadn't shared publicly about this before, and the files had been sealed because everything happened when he was a minor. So he could have kept quiet. So I think it was really powerful and vulnerable for him to come now and share with everyone what happened. The only reason, Brian Peck got found out is because Drake was dating a girl and he was at his girlfriend's house and decided not to spend time with Brian Peck. Brian Peck wanted to take him to Disneyland, which is weird. Why is a grown man taking a kid to Disneyland? And he kept calling the girlfriend's house nonstop trying to get a hold of Drake. And the girlfriend's mom peeped it and thought, this is weird. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Drake was uncomfortable and was struggling to articulate what happened, but he just tried to distance himself from Brian Peck, and then eventually he told his mom. He just burst out telling the mom what happened, and then really quick, they were able to arrest Brian Peck, and he somehow only got 18 months in prison.
Yeah, like
And
barely a year and a
yeah,
half.
barely a year, and then was able to get jobs afterwards in entertainment, even though he was a
On
registered
kids
sex offender.
shows.
So, to your point earlier, Laura, not only are people reporting things and our justice system is like failing, but they are still able to like work. So it's like a tough moral of the story. I'm like trying to figure out like what's the moral of the story? It's not like a happy ending here. It's not like justice
No.
was served.
No. And Dan Scheider's laughing in his big mansion, doing fake interviews.
Getting
Yeah,
residual
it's
checks for all of the Nickelodeon shows he's created.
right. So it's like he has this happy ending. This does not affect his life in the slightest. I'm so happy Drake Bell came forward, and he's been in the news quite a bit recently. And they show this in
Mm-hmm.
the final episodes, which I'm really happy that they did, because he had DUIs and he pled guilty to child endangerment,
Mm-hmm.
and he went into rehab. And he
Mm-hmm.
was like missing. I remember all this stuff came out about Drake
I
Bell, and everyone was like, "What is
know.
going on with him?" And like he said, he's like, I have to take responsibility for,
Mm-hmm.
all the mistakes I made. And he was like, I spiraled. I was in a really dark place. But talking about this and going to therapy and going to rehab, like contextualized everything in his life.
Everything.
And he was like, oh, I see it. Like, I understand why I've been doing all these things. I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was really powerful. Um, and I think that him sharing his story like has helped so many people. I can't even imagine, because he's just one of probably hundreds of kids who experienced that kind of abuse on these sets.
If that isn't bad enough, shortly after Brian Peck, there was a third child predator at Nickelodeon who actually brought a kid
Gosh.
onto the Nickelodeon lot. So within like a couple months, with less than a year, there were three like child predators. So
Oh my goodness.
something isn't right. There's clearly a problem. I don't know who's to blame. Is it the studio? Is it the producers? Like, I don't know. Is it HR? Like, I feel like there are a lot of
Right.
missing pieces here. Or is it the broader industry just making it okay for people like this to work in these spaces and protecting them?
It's a hard question, because it's like, oh, we can blame Dan Schneider for creating a toxic environment, but like he didn't hire these people. Like he didn't know they were predators. So it's like, who's to blame? It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we got to talk about, we mentioned her, Amanda Bynes. She's a big character in this docu-series.
She was not interviewed, but
No.
she is a main character for sure because of the fact that she was on All That, the Amanda Show, and had like a big relationship with Dan Schneider. Dan basically
Right.
discovered her and was like riding her coattails to help elevate his career because he could tell she was a star.
Right. I mean, he created the Amanda Show for her. He created What I Like About You for her. And we see that Dan kind of gets in between the relationship of Amanda and her parents, very intertwined in her personal life. And
Like, too much so.
it's so tough because, right, like they're kids, so they need guidance, but it's like you're her boss and you're helping her get emancipation from her parents. It's like,
It's not okay.
what it seems like we're crossing a line.
Especially when you're doing interviews with her in a hot tub. That just does
So
not
weird.
seem right. Like, too many
Why?
lines were being blurred. And
Ugh.
Amanda Bynes is a very tragic figure because she was like a Lindsay Lohan, such a big star, late 90s, early 2000s. Like, we loved her in the Amanda Show, and she was in movies like What a Girl Wants and She's the Man. Like, Amanda was a bona fide star.
Oh yeah.
And to see that now, she's dealing with mental health issues, she's not acting anymore. We don't know for sure. But I would assume her experience as a child star has led to a lot of her issues today. And
Yeah.
I would also assume that Dan Schneider has a role in that. And so it's really sad to see Amanda at like 14 years old on the Today Show, like bona fide star, to now like being attacked in tabloids and just, in and out of rehab. It's just like a tragic story. And something that Drake Bell talks about is like a lot of child stars have those trajectories. They have died, or they have had mental health issues, drug abuse issues. When you are a child star and you're not in the right work environment and don't have the right community around you. Because it doesn't happen for everyone, right? You see like Selena Gomez and Zendaya, like certain people seem to have made it from that child star world okay, but not everyone has. And not
No.
everyone even makes it out alive. Because Dan and Amanda's relationship falls out, he then comes back to Nickelodeon and is like, okay, I need to make more shows like Drake and Josh and the All That revival. Brings back All That. But
Mm-hmm.
sadly, the bad work conditions exist. Kids are working overtime. Kids are doing these really weird dares, like a version of Fear Factor, where a scorpion goes in their mouth, where they're in a tub of worms, where they're covered in peanut butter and then dogs lick it. Like,
Whose
how is that
idea?
one? That's why is that funny? No one laughs at Fear Factor. This is not comedy. Two, who signed off on that? I feel like watching this series, I'm like, who were the Nickelodeon execs saying, yeah, that's a great idea. Go for it. Were there not measures in place to review these scripts and plans? Like, it just seems like there were a lot of issues with how things were running. Not a lot of
Yeah.
checks and balances.
All of the dares were rough, but I could not believe my eyes when they covered Brian Kern in peanut butter and made dogs lick his body. Because, I mean, one, that's just gross. And two, like, that's like an inherently kind of like sexual um like situation like in TV shows, and it's kind of known like people use peanut butter and like dogs licking in like really weird disturbing sexual ways. So the fact that they put him in that situation and that is like such a adult inappropriate thing, I was shocked. I was like, who let this happen?
Another tough thing from the All That revival is the racism we see on set, and
Yeah.
the two token black castmates talk about how Brian Kern, he was given the role of a black kid being like a drug dealer. He wasn't selling drugs, but they played on that trope. And either like a makeup artist or a costume designer made a comment to him, "Oh, your skin's like charcoal." First of all,
What?
no
Are
one
you
has skin
kidding?
like charcoal.
No. Oh
Two,
gosh.
that is so rude and racist to say to like a 12-year-old boy. You are messing up people's psyches. Think about what you say
Ugh.
before you say it.
Skin like charcoal. Are you kidding me? This show and the environment that Dan Schneider created like ruined so much of his confidence in his adult life. And we see that Dan Schneider and the production, the producers, they drove a wedge between him and his mom that ruined their relationship for decades. Decades.
Yeah, we find that out in the like fifth episode that's like present day. And I think I had to rewind because I didn't really understand. I was like, wait, you haven't been in a good place with your mom since you were 13 because of your experience and all that, and you thought that she speaking up got you fired? That is insane. You're like late 30s now. That was so long ago.
That made me so upset. Like, Dan Schneider and the All That production single handedly ruined this family's relationship. They're literally ruining people's lives, breaking families apart. Okay, so We also get a confessional from Alexa Nicholas from Zoey 101, who's on the first 2 seasons.
Yes, we reviewed Zoey 102 before we knew any of this stuff, people. You can listen to that podcast episode if you'd like.
Yeah, go check out our Zoey 102 episode. She had a really traumatic experience on set. And I remember as a kid, we were like, wait, why is she leaving? Like, we have a new character. What happened? What happened to Nicole? And we know because she had such a horrific experience on set. Like, she said that she was crying and didn't want to go to work, that she had to quit. She had to leave. And she said the most traumatic experience was when there was an ejaculation joke and they squirted Jamie Lynn Spears in the face with this goo. And she was like, Dan Scheider was like roaring laughing. People were giggling and all the adults on set were giggling. And Jamie and Alexa were like, wait, what's so funny? Like, they didn't get it. And they're just like, oh, haha. Like, they didn't understand the joke. And it just showed that they wrote these adult jokes for it to be funny for them and pull a fast one on the kids, you know? And she, looking back, was so horrified that that happened to her.
Another show ruined by Dan Scheider for me.
I know.
Speaking of other fan favorite shows being ruined, Victorious was mentioned. Various times in Victorious, there would be scenes that had like sexual entendres. So you had Victoria Justice's character, you know, holding like weights things, trying to work out, shake weight, and like shaking them in a sexual motion. Not necessary. You have Ariana Grande in particular being like hypersexualized in clips where she's like laying on a bed and pouring water on herself. She's trying to crush a potato. She's like, like, gosh. You look back and you're like, wow, this is awful.
So uncomfortable. Who let that happen? Like, how could these adults be on set watching this all unfold and be like, oh, this is okay? I was so physically uncomfortable watching Ariana Grande do those things. Jennette McCurdy's book that came out 2 years ago.
From iCarly fame, if you guys don't know, she played Sam on iCarly and then Sam and Cat.
Yes, and she talks about Dan Scheider, and she talks about how he was the holder of all the opportunities. So in that way, he was very generous, right? Like, he promised her, like, oh, Jennette, you're going to get your own show. And that ended up being Sam and Cat, not technically her own show. And I remember in the book, she was like, well, he makes these promises and then he kind of goes back on the promises and plays a lot of those games. And she talks about how mean-spirited he was and controlling and abusive, and how he would call people idiots and just lots of name-calling. And just Dan Scheider would make people feel small on set. And that led to her breakdown. Like, she has this breakdown while on the set on Sam and Cat. And I remember in the book, she just like falls and just starts crying. Like, she can't do it anymore.
There's a clear through line from the beginning of all that and the Amanda show to what happened on Sam and Cat towards the end of Dan's tenure, of a disregard for people and a lack of empathy and like power going to his head, right? Like, this was a guy who couldn't really do well as an actor, but now has this empire on Nick, and he thought he couldn't, be taken down.
Yeah.
But
untouchable. He
eventually was. The Me Too movement happened, as we all know, and it reverberated around various industries, but particularly in entertainment, with, Harvey Weinstein, very infamous. And that's when a lot of people started to come out about Dan Scheider talking about sexual harassment, being uncomfortable on set, having to give him massages. Like, that's crazy to me that he would be like, hey, costume designer, come out and massage me in my director's chair as I'm directing the episode. So weird.
People had to pick up stop their work and be like, oh, I guess I gotta go massage Dan. He just summoned me. And the fact that Alexa Nicholas was like, I just remember, she was a kid actor on the set, like 10 years old. And she was like, I just remember seeing people massage him all day. The kids were noticing that.
Things came out, and finally Nickelodeon was like, we have to sever ties with Dan, even though he had created like so many shows for them. And even though they had given him like a Kids Choice Award, like icon or
Lifetime
crazy.
achievement.
Yeah. Like they had made it seem like Dan was the best thing since sliced pudding. I mean, but when the press got too bad, they had to make the decision to cut ties with him.
Classic.
Of course, right? Not when people had been reporting bad things on his set or sexual predators were on his sets. No. Not that. But when there's pressure because of the Me Too movement.
So as you talked about, there was a special 5th episode because there was so much talk about the series. And we see Giovanni and Brian, who were both on All That, the only 2 Black cast members in the revival. And man, did I love this interview. So Shelby, you sent this to me. Dan Scheider put out a response on YouTube. An interview of him and the actor who played Tebow on iCarly, which was interesting. So Dan set up this interview on his YouTube channel, and he's defending himself, explains his actions. He's like, oh, I'm embarrassed. I apologize for all those who I've impacted negatively. I would have, I would do things differently. And when the interviewer asked Giovanni and Brian about the Dan Warp video, laughter, immediate laughter when they were asked about it.
Their reactions and analysis of the interview were spot on.
So
Brian was like, remember, Dan's an actor. He was acting. This was a performance. I was like clutching my pearls, like, oh.
You better speak on that. Okay. I loved the reaction. I was like, they're so right. It felt like a performance. I was watching this and I was like, this is unreal. And I loved how they were like, why is he apologizing now? Because he's getting dragged online? Why didn't he do this when he got fired? When another cast member from All That spoke out against him? When Jennette McCurdy's book came out, when she spoke about the abuse she suffered on the show? But no, it's because there's a documentary all about you, talking about how bad of a person you were to so many people for decades. Now you're actually coming out and apologizing. But he still wasn't taking accountability for his actions. Like, if you watch the video, he was like, those jokes were not sexual. Those jokes were funny for kids because we were writing jokes that were for kids that kids found funny. And I loved when the interviewer was like, Giovanni, Brian, were you laughing at these ejaculation jokes, these inappropriate jokes? They're like, no, we didn't understand them. They weren't funny to us. They were for him and all the men in the writing room to be like, ha ha, look at Jamie Lynn getting squirted in the face. The audacity of Dan to ask Giovanni for a quote of support in anticipation of the docuseries coming out.
He was being strategic. He was thinking about me, myself, and I.
Clearly.
And was trying to have damage control. I know Gio is going to be in this docuseries. It'll look really good if she has a support for me before it comes out.
Shelby, why did Tebow, this Black man, one of the only Black characters on iCarly, interview Dan Scheider? Was he paid? Like, what was the reason why?
Yeah, it makes me question Tebow a bit. To be fair, I haven't thought of him at all. No. And so maybe this was a ploy to get back, into fame, the media, get his bread. Maybe he needed a check. It's just strange that he would give Dan Scheider a platform when everyone else is distancing himself from him. given the accusations.
It makes no sense. And
Weird choice.
I hated how Tebow was like, yeah, you know, some of the people in the documentary talk about racism on set, but I only had the best experience with you. And, you know, you've been a champion for diversity. And Dan was like, yeah, I've been a champion for diversity. Like, Kanan and Kel, I launched their careers. My first movie was Good Burger with Kanan and Kel, all this stuff. And I loved Brian's response to this. He was like, the question was about me and Giovanni, and you overlooked us in your response about overlooking us. I just thought that was so good because it just shows that Dan is living in a different reality and he's spinning. The actor wheels are turning. He's spinning. He's improving right now.
It seems like Dan has not learned any
No,
lessons. So
none.
I hope he does not work again.
And parallel to the Bravo universe, it's giving Tom Sandoval no remorse for any of his actions.
Mm,
He's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed. I would do things differently. I shouldn't have done that. But he's in defense mode, which I think is so bizarre. Just humility. This is all about humility. And I was not seeing that at all. The audacity to put out an interview on your own YouTube channel to just defend yourself and explain your side of the story. Huh?
not a good look.
Shelby, what are your overall thoughts? Is Quiet on Set a wait or a watch?
I think it's a watch. It's definitely not an easy one,
No.
but I think it's a informative critique on the entertainment industry,
Yeah.
particularly kids TV. I'm not going to lie, after watching this, I feel like child actors should not be allowed to act, or there needs to be like a lot of precautions and more rules in place, because it just seems like it is not a safe space to work,
No.
and there's more harm being done than good. Like,
Right.
I could do without, scripted shows like that if it means these people will be safe. Give me all the animated shows, okay? I'll watch Kim
Right?
Possible any day if it means people on Drake and Josh are safe on set. If it's too triggering for y'all, of course you listen to something like this or just read recaps online because everyone's talking about it.
Yeah. I agree. It's a watch. It is like very hard to watch, but it's such an important story and I'm really glad that I saw it, especially when our childhood was defined by all of these shows. And that's what makes it even more upsetting cuz the abuse that Drake Bell suffered was before Drake and Josh even premiered, right? So, which is even just crazier. Like, how, and I, during the show, he's like, I don't know how I did it. Like, how did I go on? I can't even imagine. I can't. So, yeah, it's like, do I even want to watch those shows anymore? Like, some people are protesting, like, all those Nick shows. I don't cry that much watching stuff, but seeing Drake Bell's dad, like that got me teary eyed. Like that was heart
We're
wrenching.
not doing categories for this episode, but if I
Right.
did have a love to love, it would be Drake's dad.
So on to our what to watch segment. So I guess not Dan Schneider content. Don't watch that. Don't watch that.
I'd say, in terms of current events, Paramount, the studio that owns Nickelodeon, is currently trying to sell its assets. It's
Oh,
one of the studios that is doing the worst compared to, Disney and Warner Bros. Discovery and Netflix. So I'm curious how this documentary, if at all, could impact how people feel about Nickelodeon as an asset
right.
as Paramount's going through this sale. So just something to keep tabs on for my business folks, my entertainment
Hmm.
folks. People are saying the sale could happen any day now. So keep tabs, people.
Let us know what you think of this episode. It was different for us. If you want more of this content, let us know. You can email us at sisterswhowatch@gmail.com. And you can also DM us on Instagram or our social medias at Sisters Who Watch. So make sure you give us a follow there and go subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you get updates when we post new episodes, and give us 5 stars wherever you listen.
Yes, thanks y'all for the support. It means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay
and
watching.
get our merch. Thanks. Bye.
Everything.